Okay, Kitty Dukakis indirectly supported environmental regulation by framing it as a public health issue, particularly, for example, as it relates to cleaning up hazardous waste sites. But she also advocated for community involvement in local environmental concerns. And I think that's been a theme throughout the day, but it's certainly a theme of this panel about community involvement. So in this session, we're going to learn how neighborhood parks build resilience, community, and reduce urban heat island effect. The projects we will learn about were all co-created with people in their neighborhoods. We're going to begin with Northeastern architecture professor Sarah Carr, who focuses on the connections between urban landscape, architecture, climate resilience, and human health. So she covers the whole gamut. Today, she will talk about C2C supported projects that she did in Chelsea and New Bedford to improve urban landscapes and resilience. Next, we have Chris Osgood, who's the director of the Office of Climate Resilience, and Mayor Michelle Wu, senior advisor for infrastructure. He'll give us an overview of Boston's climate resilience planning and how it strengthens neighborhoods. Chris will also speak about the regulatory and technical complexities in developing parks and building resilience, using Moakley Park as an ongoing example. Next, we will hear from Sherry Ruane, who's the Chief Development Officer at Weston and Sampson Design Studio. She'll talk about the actual designing and building, rather than just the planning, of resilient infrastructure projects, and particularly her work that's been in collaboration with the City of Boston, but also in collaboration with residents. And then we will turn to something a little different. So when we think of resilience, we most commonly think about resilience against sea level rise, stormwater, and urban heat islands. But in my own work on eco-districts, it means something different. It means resilience in the sense of energy, and how do you build a community that has affordable energy, renewable energy, and resilient to the extent that you can island from the grid in cases where, for example, through fire, through flooding, that you've been shut off of power. So there's different approaches of this, and one of them is green zones. Green zones are a focus on disadvantaged communities. And for that, we will have Greg King, who is owning manager of TSK Energy Solutions, an advisory committee member from the School of Public Policy. And Greg and I worked on an EPA grant together to create a green zone in Grove Hall, which by the time the Trump administration took over, those grants were no longer available, but is still working on getting legislation to support green zones, which very much are about both kinds of resilience, energy resilience as well as the other. So I'll turn it over to you, Sarah. Up here? Yeah.
Hi, everyone. It's so great to be here in honor of the contributions of the Dukakis family, but I also wanted to say in honor of our colleague, Ted Landsmark. So if all of you don't know, in addition to all of his other accomplishments, has had a huge role in shaping the architecture and landscape of Boston, most chiefly through his work with BPDA, but also Boston Architectural College, Boston Society of Architects, Emerald Necklace Conservancy, almost anything you can think of. So just wonderful to be here today and hopefully, and mentoring young architecture faculty. So great to be here. As Joan mentioned, yes, my research touches a lot of issues, but the fact is architecture and landscape does actually address many issues, from climate change to health, usually even in one site. And so I was told this was supposed to be like a TED-type talk, so I'm going to just start a little bit of high level, and then I promise we will get to the fun images very soon. So in a lot of my work, we're looking at extreme heat. Extreme heat and its health effects are an increasingly urgent issue for neighborhoods as climate change accelerates. So not only does it cause direct effects like heat stroke, but it can exacerbate air pollution, stress, and cardiovascular and pulmonary conditions. Additionally, both the old and the young are extremely vulnerable to its effects. The health effects of heat are not just a physical health issue, but are strongly related to social networks and support. In his landmark book, Heat Wave, Eric Kleinenberg discovered that the majority of deaths in the 1995 Chicago heat wave were not just elderly, but elderly people that were isolated in their overheated homes and therefore weren't being checked on or were not aware of resources such as cooling centers. So in the social ecological model of health, the built environment, that is the architecture, landscape, everything around us, plays a large part in both providing opportunities for health, but also facilitating those social networks, which we'll talk about today, and those services. The pathways, though, through which we can create healthier and more resilient neighborhoods are complex, and they really do require cooperation at multiple levels, which we'll be talking about today. And so today, you'll see how this can be accomplished from the planning level to landscapes, but also how something as, I would say, appearingly simple as a park can actually address multiple vulnerabilities, from heat to flooding, but also other effects of climate change. So in my own research here at Northeastern, with many colleagues across the College of Arts, Media, and Design and College of Social Science and Humanities, we really try to understand how lived experiences in neighborhoods can be layered on top of the data. So whether that is heat readings, access to open space, walkability metrics, or even data about the homes themselves, about the architecture, in order to facilitate design that is driven by the community themselves and lead to neighborhood improvements that are responsive, humane, and facilitate health. In this project with my colleague Michelle LeBoy, we interviewed residents in Worcester, Massachusetts about their experience with extreme heat and cold in relationship to where services should be better allocated. So asking questions like, who lives here? Who is going to be most vulnerable in a power outage? Where do you see power outages? And sort of echoing what we've already heard today, we found that most people were actually worried about communities where there were a lot of elderly residents. And this project in New Bedford, in partnership with the philanthropic organization Envision Resilience, but also local nonprofits Groundwork South Coast and Love the Ave, as well as the National Park Service, our students built models to work with residents on determining streetscape improvements for economic development, as well as creating a comprehensive green infrastructure plan with Groundwork, which also does workforce training for young people to install green infrastructure. And this plan was targeted to mitigate heat, address stormwater, and create also gardening opportunities for residents in New Bedford's North End. And students worked with residents, made these great drawings, we created interactive activities to work with residents to propose intersection improvements, again, that address heat, but also pedestrian safety and flooding. In our Dukakis Center-funded project in Chelsea, Massachusetts, we worked with environmental justice nonprofit Green Roots, as well as the Boston Society of Landscape Architects, on a long-term project to convert a privately owned parking lot into a city park in order to mitigate heat in the neighborhood, as well as facilitate community ownership, social networks, and chiefly design that came from the ground up, from the community itself. As many of us know, Chelsea is one of the hottest communities in the Boston area, as shown here by the Boston University Sea Heat Study. And this is very much a direct product of its built environment, specifically its landscape. An analysis of Chelsea's ground cover shows that it has 80% impervious surfaces, which create more heat, but only has 4% green space and only 2% of it covered by tree canopy. And so the logical way to address this is through landscape architecture itself to address this inequity. Green Roots has really led the charge on creating a demonstration cool block in the city, which encompasses paving coatings, roof coatings, tree planting, and the creation of this park, which is the centerpiece of the cool block. And if you're interested, there's actually a film you can watch online by Turnaround Films about the creation of the cool block and featuring one of our Northeastern students, former Northeastern students, Graham Moitoso, who worked on this grant as well. But a park is not created overnight, especially not one with such social and environmental importance. So we attended pop-up events We brought our architecture and landscape architecture students to get input from neighborhood residents. And actually, we did some improvement work on the site, including a swing installation. We mulched. We even built steps out of lobster traps and stones, as you can see here, to negotiate a grade change across the park. And so really, this was so residents could start to use the lot and take ownership of it before it was more formally designed. And there'll actually be a nice close to this talk today, because in Sherry's talk, you're going to see how it turned out in the end. We also provided flexible seating and planting structures such as these, which let residents design the park by moving pieces around for different events. It also brought in bees. We used pollinator plants. And in the meantime, here at Northeastern, we continue to examine ways about how this flexible use and community input could inform a permanent design, as well as other ways to distribute green infrastructure and shade infrastructure across Chelsea, such as using bus stops. And lastly, we also worked with the Keystone Boys and Girls Club in Chelsea to continue to design, build, and use this pop-up park in real time and at full scale. So when it was fully built out, as you'll see in Sherry's presentation, they understood it was their space as well, and they actually built these benches out of more lobster traps. As you can probably tell, somebody donated a lot of lobster traps to this project, but we found multiple uses for them. So this research at Northeastern allows us to not only understand best practices for impactful design, but work across all levels of partnership necessary to create more resilient neighborhoods, from the individual to the community, to the private sector, to the government. Thank you.
Yeah. You can have your seat now.
Thank you so much, all. Thank you all for all that you're doing every single day to make Boston a more resilient community. I'm Chris Osgood. I have the great pleasure of leading Boston's Office of Climate Resilience and serving as a senior advisor to our mayor. And for our mayor, her priority is to make sure that Boston remains a wonderful place for every family to call home for generations to come. And we're not going to be able to achieve that goal if we're not facing the risks that Professor Fitzgerald outlined at the top: stormwater flooding, coastal flooding, and extreme heat. And so I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about those risks, talking very briefly about the city's response to it. As a city, we moved from a decade of community-driven planning to a decade of implementation of these community projects. So I'll start first with stormwater flooding. It is obviously raining outside, but not torrentially so, but we've seen the impact of torrential rainstorms in places like Leominster, New York City, repeatedly in Vermont. We know that it is a question of when, not if, severe rainstorms are going to hit our city. And for our city, there are two principal agencies that are focused on this risk: our Boston Water and Sewer Commission, that manages about 600 miles of storm drain infrastructure below the streets, and our Streets Cabinet, that manages about 800 roadway miles across our city. For our Boston Water Sewer Commission, in the last 2 years, as many of you may know, they've rolled out a new stormwater program, a program which is ensuring that we are putting more of our investment towards projects that lower stormwater risk, improve water quality as it enters places like the Charles, the Neponset, the Mystic, or the harbor itself, and provides incentives to property owners to make sure that they are making investments on their own properties to be able to handle more stormwater directly. And our Streets Cabinet has created a new office, an Office of Green Infrastructure, that is changing the way in which we build streets so that they are incorporating green infrastructure in our roadway investments from the start. On the screen here, you see Central Square. It is a project in East Boston that some of you may know. It is a place where we are able to build out into the roadway, expand the amount of green infrastructure, expand this park, and be able to plant a whole new set of street trees, expand the open space, and have so much more of that water actually captured and irrigate the trees that are there. Another project that many of you are very familiar with, likely, is the project of the Muddy River. Turn back the clock nearly 30 years. Some of you may recall an absolutely torrential storm that did hit the city of Boston and did knock out much of the Green Line for a significant period of time. Since that period, the town of Brookline, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and the city of Boston all collaborated on a nearly $100 million reinvestment in this Muddy River that helped us not only enhance the park, but improve its utility as a stormwater resilient infrastructure that protects our neighborhoods. To quickly hop to coastal flooding. Boston is a city that experiences flooding even on sunny days in some parts of our city, places like Long Wharf, places like Morrissey Boulevard. And we are a city that is looking at about 40 inches of sea level rise between the start of this century and the 2070s. And for a city that 1/6 of which is built on filled tidelands, that has massive impact. In fact, by the 2070s, if we do not act, the expectation is that we'll be looking at about $1.3 billion of annualized losses as a city. So our focus as a city has been to take action. There's been a lot of work which has already been done around new policies and new programs and new projects. To echo Sarah's comments, I want to give a lot of credit to Ted Landsmark. One of those policies is the Coastal Flood Resilience Overlay District, which was put in place by the city's planning department. It is one of the most progressive pieces of zoning policy that ensures that large new buildings that get built in the city of Boston are built for the 2070 1% storm, not just for today's flood risk. We also have been running a series of programs through our Office of Emergency Management looking at near-term flood risk. How would we respond if a Superstorm Sandy were to hit Boston this summer, this fall, et cetera? And then working in collaboration with Sherry, and Sherry will talk much more about this, on a series of projects, and the mayor has put about $150 million in the city's 5-year capital plan to really advance a set of coastal resilience projects, many of which are focused on our parks. One of those is what you see on the screen, a collaboration between our Parks Department and Weston and Sampson. It is Langone Park in the North End. And it is a wonderful example, I think, of what we're trying to achieve across all of our resilience projects, which is not just to lower the risk, but to actually enhance the neighborhood and improve the ecology of the city. That bench is a wonderful place to sit. If you haven't gone there and taken a look at the Constitution and the harbor and the new Bill Russell Bridge, I highly encourage you to. And probably unbeknownst to most people who are sitting on that bench, it is the actual storm, the seawall that is actually protecting the north end during the course of a storm. It's sort of that incorporation of resilient assets with neighborhood investments. The third quick risk I want to talk about, and Sarah did a great job of outlining both the risk and the response around this, is around extreme heat. This is the #1 weather-related cause of death in our country. As Sarah noted, it has significantly different impacts across people and across geographies in our city, for seniors, for youth, for those with underlying health conditions, for places that are urban heat islands, places that have had chronic disinvestment in open space historically in our city. As a city, we are investing significantly in things we can do during the course of heat waves. Next Tuesday, the expectation is we're going to be approaching 90 degrees. We are looking at what are the things that we can be putting out and doing in certain areas of our city to provide shade tents, misting towers, things that can help protect people during that hot weather. We're also looking at the long-term transformation of public space. One of those ways is something which Sarah touched on, which is the planting of street trees. And our Parks Department, since they published their new urban forestry report in 2022, has totally changed how they prioritize street tree planting in the city of Boston. So today, 40% of our street trees get planted in the 20% of Boston that has lower canopy cover. Those places we have traditionally planted fewer trees in the past. We're also putting in place new projects and programs really targeted towards helping those folks who are most impacted by extreme heat. We are one of the first cities this summer, we are one of the first cities, northern cities, that's putting in place a set of requirements for our own workforce and our contractors to have heat illness prevention plans in place so that we are able to support our workforce and those that are working for the city during extreme heat events. Just to touch on one other quick project, 2 years ago, the city of Boston rolled out the largest set of green roofs on bus shelters anywhere in the nation. These are largely on the corridor of the 28 bus routes, so Blue Hill Ave and Malcolm X Boulevard. It was done in collaboration with Youth Build, the Workforce Development Agency, and the Social Impact Collective. And it is a great way not only to be able to handle some stormwater that's hitting our streets, create a bit of a pollinator highway, but also empirically lower the temperature for folks who are waiting on hot days for a critical transit service. In fact, it's been documented that these bus shelters are lowering the temperature for those who are waiting on those hot days by about 7 degrees. So before turning it over to Sherry, who is a fundamental partner in so much of this work, just wanted to reflect back on the how. We talk a lot about the what, like what the risk is, what we are building to reduce the risk. But so much of what we are actually working on is how we actually, as a community, respond to the risks in front of us in ways that strengthen the fabric of Boston. And that so much of that is about sort of how you build community and not just build infrastructure. So to quickly look at the 3 projects that I highlighted, the Muddy River Project is really a story, in my mind, of collective governance. It is a massive project that would not be possible without Boston and Brookline and the state and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers finding a way to work together to deliver something. The story of Langone Park is so much about ground-up design. I really like that. I like that term. It's really figuring out what is the thing that the community wants that we can deliver that works on a beautiful blue sky day just as much as it works during a storm, so that we can build momentum for the next project and we can provide an asset that works for residents in general. And a lot of the story of the green roofs on bus shelters is about how we build it and with whom we build it. It's so important to be able to work with community organizations to deliver these projects and build that capacity within our city and within our region to do even more, knowing that there's so much more work in front of us than we have done already. So I appreciate the opportunity to be able to be with all of you today. Thank you for all you're doing, and I will turn it over to Sherry Ruane, who, again, is a great collaborator on so much of this.
Thank you all so much for having me. As was advertised by Sarah multiple times, here is one of the parks that we built in collaboration with the community and with Green Roots and with others. And one of the key pieces of any of this work is understanding that through the process of design, we are truly enabling agency and communicating that people do have control over their built environment. A lot of people assume that what's out there is what's out there. That's what you get. That is actually not true. And the more we can teach, frankly, the younger generation and the kids in these neighborhoods that they have the power to inform what their landscape and their built environment looks like, the better we will all be when we're all older and they're in charge. So Chelsea is, in fact, one of the front-line dense cities, and they are implementing projects that are really a good example of what neighborhood-scale resilience truly means. So this is not a big, splashy waterfront park. We love those too, but these really are more working streets and neighborhood parks. These are shouldering a lot of the responsibility around the work. So the challenge is integrating the stormwater management, the safety, the client adaptation into these tight spaces, and that includes rights-of-way. So on this slide, you can see Eastern Ave. That's on the left is what it looks like today. One of the proposals in this effort to cool Chelsea and reduce urban heat island effect is shown on the right. This is a rendering, but each and every block that we do takes another bite, another piece out. And the more that we can create consistent guidelines and design frameworks, the better off we're going to be. So these are the types of things that we're working on, again, with very deep community engagement. And really what makes the progress possible is close coordination with the city and sustained engagement with the community. So design decisions are informed by how people actually move through and use these spaces, but also what they have said. And the renderings are key because it allows people to understand what we're proposing. You know, even this drawing, which is rendered, is hard for people to understand, right? You are flying over the park from the sky, a perspective you will never enjoy this park from. But here, let me show it to you so that you can tell me what you think. So we often are deploying representation techniques like this one to be like, this is what it's going to feel like to be on the ground there. What do you think? And we get great feedback. And then when the next iteration is updated with that feedback, people are like, oh, they heard me. Great news. So that has been really a significant success. Another piece where this is in Boston, in East Boston, and you can see there's two moments on this rendering that are a little brighter than the rest of the city. And that's just to highlight Lewis Wharf and Carlton Wharf, which are two areas that have been identified as opportunities for climate intervention. So early resilience work in East Boston really helped establish many of the lessons that are now being applied citywide. And projects along the waterfront like these really demonstrate the value of pairing flood protection with public space, as Chris noted about Langone, which is truly one of our, it was the first actually resilient park built in Boston with the Climate Ready Boston guidelines. I think a critical flood happened in the middle of design. And it was really before people were thinking about integrating sea level rise projections into design, and then the park flooded mid-design, and we're like, oh, maybe we should pay attention to sea level rise projections. And it was amazing how quickly the city adapted and we were able to pivot and push forward. So this rendering shows Lewis Wharf and really these public spaces that are multitaskers and able to provide, in addition to the urban heat island effect reduction, managing stormwater, and also sea level rise. And in general, in the landscape, there are really three strategies that you can take in resilience. One is to protect, that is the wall that you saw. One is to accommodate, and that's part of this design, is that it's okay for some of this to flood. It will go away, you will be able to use it again. And then the last is to retreat. Not last, the third is to retreat. And that's often referred to as managed retreat, where key elements or resources or facilities or infrastructure might need to move up or back in order to get out of the way. It's much more challenging and complicated than the first two, but it's still a part of the repertoire. And really, the work that we did in East Boston created a foundation for how Boston now approaches this neighborhood scale resilience. And it is an iterative process that builds capacity over time. So all of these interventions, our goal is never to cut people off from the water. And if you ever are out at Langone, you might notice that the seawall is certainly there, but there are these walkways that actually go all the way down to the water. And people are like, oh, the wall is not contiguous. How does this work? But the way that we graded the site, the top of the wall is the same elevation as the back of the site. So the whole site is really the barrier, but the wall itself is wave mitigation and attenuation so that you're not getting huge crashing waves in larger storm events. And also it allows stormwater out. One of the snafus that you can run into when you build a big barrier along the water is that when it rains behind the wall, the rain gets stuck behind the wall. So it's important to let that out. So these interventions, we do look to the 2071% and we say, okay, what do we need to design to there? We will do that. We understand that in the future we may need larger, taller interventions. So we build these anticipating that. We don't need a 5-foot wall today. That may be down the road. We will build this 3-foot wall with the ability to build upon it. So there's geotechnical, structural, subsoil analysts that all work with us to develop these flood solutions. Last but not least, I did want to talk about Moakley Park, which is a massive undertaking by the city of Boston. This is an overview that shows the entire park. There's a dashed line right through the middle of it that shows where a flood barrier is being proposed. It connects on the south side of the site and the north side of the site. So Weston & Sampson is working with many partners and other consultants to develop a cohesive strategy that will help block off one of the major flood pathways into not only South Boston, where this sits, but the South End, Route 93, a few other major things, south in Roxbury. So this is a really important project for that. This image, which was developed by one of our partners, Stoss, this shows active recreation and how it's been deployed across the site. And the flood barrier component, which is where my cursor is running right now, the goal there is to integrate that into the site so that you are not there thinking, there's the flood barrier. This is an integrated component into the landscape. We've built important site features off it, amphitheaters, overlooks, sports fields that work right into it with seating, and really worked incredibly hard to make this park feel really dovetailed into the context that it sits within. So this work really brings together the coastal flood protection and all the different systems I talked about, but also the recreation into one civic landscape. So moving this from this vision, gorgeous picture, sort of easy to do in Photoshop. Not easy, don't tell my team I said that. Hard to do, but easier than building it for millions and millions of dollars. Taking that and converting that into actual constructible, permittable, affordable landscapes, not easy. So that really takes what I like to call an interdependent team which is engineers, scientists, the government, the neighbors, everybody sitting around the table. And the reason I use the word interdependent is because we truly believe we are dependent on everyone around the table. There is not one person at that table that is not as important as the other voices. So the geotech is going to have ideas about landscape. The neighborhood representatives are going to have ideas about the barrier, and they're all valid, and we're working together and iterating through these scenarios to come up with what is going to be truly best for this site. And that's something else that we pride ourselves on. The designs that we implement could not work anywhere else. This is not a copy-paste. Our goal is that you can't tell that these are Weston and Sampson designs and that they just feel like they've always been there because they're so inherently grounded in the space. So just to close, across Chelsea, Boston, a few themes really are consistent, is that resiliency depends on long-term partnerships, not isolated projects. Implementation is where equity and trust are tested most directly. And resilience is most successful when it shows up in the streets and the parks that people use every day. That's the work that ultimately turns climate planning into lived experience and improves quality of life. Thank you.
Presentation is.
Oh, wait. Hold on, let me fix that for you.
Okay, great.
Yeah, let me fix that for you. So I want to.
While we're doing that, everyone want to stand up for a second, take a nice seventh inning stretch. Take a deep breath in. Yeah, well, thank you. Good afternoon. So my name's Gregory King. I'm the managing director of TSK Energy Solutions. We're a single-man consultancy located in Cambridge, trying to do good work around energy and environmental justice. I'm here today actually standing in for Ed Gaskins, who's the executive director of Greater Grove Hall Main Street. Ed had a trip and got in touch and said he would not be able to attend. Could I stand in for him? And he's a pretty big shoes to fill. I met Ed through some work with the Mass Clean Energy Center, and I had a chance to learn about his community in Greater Grove Hall, which is actually probably the poster child for every urban problem that exists on the planet. It's 3% of the land mass, 83% of the brownfields of the city of Boston. It's a heat island. It's got terrible air quality, lots of abandoned property, and it's also subject to stormwater damage, et cetera. So I've been actually working with Ed on a system in an effort to try to bring a new legislative framework into Massachusetts. And this is really in response to the reality that particularly black and brown communities have suffered from decades of uninvestment, a failure to invest. And so we have cumulative burdens that have grown over time, have only gotten worse. And in spite of a lot of policy efforts, we haven't really moved the needle very far. So there's been a history of exclusion from clean energy initiatives. These communities suffer from high energy burden, and to make matters worse, we often see the work that is being done in the community to try to mitigate some of the worst consequences of the underinvestment or lack of investment being done by folks, outside the community. And so in 2021, I had the pleasure of working on the climate bill that's been passed by then Governor Baker, where we codified environmental justice. However, in the process of the policy-making process, which is, again, sausage-making, there are a number of compromises where we ended up with a definition of environmental justice communities that have nothing to do with any environmental damage. If you're familiar with environmental justice designations in Massachusetts, it's based on race, income, and language isolation. It has nothing to do with any environmental damage or evidence of public health, trauma, or anything else. And as a result, we have over 200 communities that are quote-unquote EJ communities, or I say, I'm sorry, 200 out of 351 cities and towns have EJ census block are considered then eligible for environmental justice funding. And so what happens in this system is that those communities, wealthy communities like Lexington and Wellesley, they are able to get funds to their community, while other less resourced communities like Grove Hall have great difficulty. So rather than overhaul the system in its entirety, in collaboration with Ed and Joan, I introduced the Green Zone legislation, which seeks to augment the existing designation of EJ census block by enabling communities with environmental damage to be designated as green zones and thus eligible for something we refer to as the Green Zone Investment Fund. This is an attempt to create a system to mitigate the system that's already in place that has caused these particular problems. We drafted an act promoting environmental justice in Massachusetts. It's draft legislation. As I mentioned, it's designed to complement, not replace the current system. It requires development of a scoring system comprised of public health, greenhouse gas emissions data, energy burden, and demographic data. And it establishes a system for designation of environmental justice communities as green zones. So think of this body of EJ communities around the state where the most damage would be designated as green zones and then available for creating a green zone investment fund. And so why is this important? What's the connection to resiliency? Well, we don't have resilient communities if we do not invest in resiliency as a measure, right? And so part of the challenge that we have today is that while money, you read in the paper, there's money going into EJ communities, you know, when you kind of dig down under the covers, you realize that that money is really not getting to the most needy. And that's a problem that I think we can solve by virtue of, you know, recognizing that we're not in a level playing field. We have decades of disinvestment. There are some communities more significantly damaged than others, and we need to come up with a way to prioritize those particular communities. And so the Green Zone Investment Fund is intended to be funded not by taxpayer or ratepayer dollars, but by polluters. And so as part of the Green Zone initiative, what we've done is we have created a framework, a planning framework, which is intended to support community engagement, you know, innovation investment, quantify social impacts, using something like the impact rate of return, identify projects for investments and prioritize those projects based on their potential for impact, increase community resiliency for climate change, and improve public health. And so this is the foundation of the Green Zone initiative in Massachusetts, you know, again, looking to try to direct public dollars to those most in need in a way that takes into account the need for good tools and good planning methodologies so that the projects that have the greatest potential for reversing some of the damage get prioritized. So, you know, and you know, what is a green zone? So in our view of a green zone, it's a community transformed from highly polluted, economically distressed, into more of a vibrant area that practices, that has good green business practice, healthier environment, and stronger economic future. And the planning framework, you know, kind of consists of a number of different steps, beginning with an environmental audit, where you do air quality, health data, land use analysis, a community landscape analysis, looking at the building topology, hardscape, et cetera, and provides a summary of all overall infrastructure. Grove Hall happens to be a neighborhood where there's a lot of impervious surfaces, and a good percentage of the housing there is, not surprisingly, multifamily. There's only like 4% of the housing there that would be considered single family. Mostly are triple deckers and two families built back in the late 1800s or early 1900s. And then the methodology includes a project financial framework that kind of looks at inputs, health inputs and what have you, and computes a score. That score then determines whether you would qualify to become a green zone, and if so, how you might be prioritized. And all this feeds into what we call a community master plan, where we do different project feasibility studies to essentially take the entirety of all of the things that potentially could be done and rank them so that they can be invested in on a priority basis. As I mentioned, the Greenhouse Zone Investment Fund is something that we're looking at being funded by things like the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, the building performance ordinances that cities like Cambridge, where I live, and Boston through Berto and Newton have passed. And the Attorney General has a legal settlement fund where they've been awarded dollars. So all of these particular sources of funds need a more directed way. And part of the reason we have the disparities we have is that there's politics involved in the distribution of these funds. And so often we see that the most needy of the communities are never quite able to secure these funds. We're a state that's acknowledged for its solar deployments. We've done maybe 15 gigawatts of solar, but less than 2% is serving a low-income household or a black and brown community. So with this particular legislation, the goal is to try to bring more science, more quantitative analysis into the planning process, and to provide a way for communities to qualify for dollars that could be invested in things beyond, housing. So green infrastructure, green roofs, white roofs, as well as obviously stormwater management and mitigation, more green spaces, all of which tend to be difficult things to attract developers to do because they don't necessarily have the traditional kind of payback or ROI. It's about wanting to create a system where we can extend the health and well-being of entire communities by recognizing that investments are an important part of the way we move forward and trying to create a more equitable future. Thank you.
So we've covered quite a bit in terms of the scope and scale of what resilience means. I have some questions, certainly, but let me start with questions from the audience, and you may have them on okay. So let's start with this one. What are the opportunities to build smarter while also addressing the high cost of housing? I don't know how much the housing element, except for Grove Hall, might factor in here.
I'm sorry, what was the question again?
For the previous panel?
Yeah, is this for this panel? What are the opportunities to build smarter while also addressing the high cost of housing?
I'm happy to address that.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, so I think building smarter when it comes to housing stock, we need to lean more into the prefab world where we have the ability now to create building subassemblies in a factory, have them shipped to a site, and have them erected in a month. And to me, this is an exciting development in the built environment, one that has a lot of potential Obviously, that type of ecosystem would require, manufacturing because of the weight and size of some of these assemblies to be relatively close to where they're deployed, but they do sort of transform the entire construction of a building from being a labor intensive to being a bit more of a material intensive. And we have the opportunity to build these some sub-assemblies with things like mass timber and wool fiber and other natural sources that would lend to their overall sustainability and their ability to support low embodied carbon. So I think there's a future where people who work in construction are working in a factory, and that factory is building these sub-assemblies, and they're transported in site, and they're erected in weeks.
Yeah. Great. I have a question concerning what, for the other three, you talked about both hard infrastructure as well as green infrastructure in these parks. And you mentioned the Boston Water and Sewer Commission, and we know John Sullivan has some very strong ideas about the need for hard infrastructure, right? And at one point, when Mariama White-Hammond was in, she said, no, we're doing all nature-based solutions. And obviously, you can't do all one or the other. Could you speak to the relative contribution in any given project and in the city in general?
Sure. I think there's two separate ways I would look at that. One is that I think we very much recognize the co-benefits, the incredible co-benefits of green infrastructure. That having trees, having a park, having a place that sort of is a great place to be is one of those things that residents very much want, and is one of those things that makes any investment that we're making a great thing, again, on that sort of sunny day and not just on that stormy day. I also think there's a lot of opportunity, though, for us to deepen our understanding of the efficacy of green infrastructure. I think we should not look at gray infrastructure as inherently effective and green infrastructure as necessarily less so. And I think so. To exactly your point, there is a lot of work which is being done, and with credit to the Boston Water and Sewer Commission and others, but a lot of work by a group called the Stone Living Lab out of UMass Boston in collaboration with Boston Harbor Now, that is looking at how do you actually do the research to quantify the resilience-related benefits of nature-based solutions. And that body of work is incredibly important to us because in any investment we want to make sure that we are having that risk-reducing benefit, but we would love to be able to provide that in a way that works in any of our neighborhoods best. I do think there is a piece of intersection we can do where almost all of our projects are not going to be all one or all the other. And really so much of this is about a fusion of the green and the gray. And you see that already in some places along Boston's waterfront, places like the Condor Street Urban Wild in East Boston, or a section of the South Boston waterfront, where there's a set of living seawall panels that have been installed on what is a traditional seawall, with the idea that as we are making investments in some of that necessary gray infrastructure, that we're also improving the overall ecology of the harbor, something which is a goal for all of us. I don't know if there's...
One thing I will add, and it's sort of a word of caution, is that green infrastructure is awesome, and we don't want the public open spaces to become stormwater overflows and nothing else. So I think, there's a couple times we were working with Boston Water and Sewer at Harambee Park in Dorchester, and they're like, oh, this is amazing. You guys are at this low point. We've got a big interceptor right there. We'll just put it into the park. And we were like, no, thank you. So we have to really work together to understand what is the balance. Yes, we want to multitask in those parks, and it is incredibly important that they remain high-quality open space for passive and active recreation that provides access to everybody. It can't just be a thing. And when we had massive snow, the first thing DPW asks is, can we dump the snow in the parks? And everyone's like, why don't you want the snow in the parks? Like, do you know what's in the snow? Terrible things are in the snow. And when you put them in parks and it melts, terrible things are in the parks. And so not thinking about the park as this empty space to be used, but thinking about it as a living, breathing system of infrastructure that together offers these benefits. We don't want to compromise on ultimately the improvement to quality of life of the people that need them so desperately.
Great. Sarah, did you have any thought on that? Questions from the audience? Maria?
Thank you. I wanted to talk a little bit about green gentrification, as we're talking about how important it is to have green infrastructure, but also more greenery and more trees and more parks. What we have seen so many studies that how that leads to gentrification, something that we actively try to avoid. But can you talk a little bit about these dilemmas and how they can be better handled?
Yeah, I mean, there's a school of thought I've seen that says just green enough, where no offense, mostly policymakers that are thinking about like what is the line between neighborhood improvement and causing gentrification. I take some issue with that school of thought just because I think everybody deserves the best green space and the best built environment that's available to them, the best design. But the truth is this is where design and policy have to come into cooperation with each other. If you look at a project like in Washington, D.C., 11th Street Bridge Park, right, which was done with policies in place with community land trusts to keep people in place in their homes, right, after the park was built, to create funds for local businesses also to stay in place. And so it's not just about the design. I think a lot of people tend to blame the design, right? But if you have those policies in place, and I would say also something, as we've all talked about here, if the design is done with the residents as well, right, and they feel welcome to it and they can fight for it, then I think we try to guard against it, right? It's very different than, say, somebody, coming in, flying in and just doing the design and maybe putting in a lot of amenities that don't have the community in mind. Then yes, that's going to hyperspeed gentrification. I would also say these are great questions. I love that I see more and more landscape architecture and architecture students come in, and this is the first thing they think about. They say, we want to do the best design, but what about gentrification? So it's definitely something we are tackling with this generation right now that's learning.
Good answer. Any other questions from this audience? Okay, I'm going to wrap it up with one. I know I keep going on about Moakley Park, but I think we've kind of given the impression today, you get the community and an engineer and and a landscape architect sitting at a table and you come up with a solution and boom, it's there. It's a lot more complicated than that. And so, here again, you've got like all these different state agencies can you talk a little bit about that level of what it takes to develop that park?
Yeah, I'll start and then you jump in. I'm actually only 25, but I look 53 because of Moakley Park. So I'm just kidding. It's because of all the City of Boston parks. No, but truly, I joke, but it is almost as much political and social engineering as it is physical engineering, and that is not a joke. We must operate at so many different levels and meet people where they're at in the community, and then read the room with the elected officials, understand the permitting agency. And there's something, I will say, I benefit from Weston and Sampson's longevity. We were founded in 1899, and to the best of my knowledge, only the accountants started then. Everyone else is new. But knowing the agencies and knowing the permitters and having relationships with them is absolutely critical. You know what their hot buttons are. You know what questions they're going to ask. You know what red lines are going to show up on the drawing. So you submit a package sort of already understanding that's what's coming. And then also understanding that while the design vision
is inspiring and gets people fired up and really can change hearts and minds, it also must adapt to whatever the current condition is. Whether that's the electeds want more active recreation, I'm just making this one up, or whether the permitting agencies, have issue with too much gray and not enough green,
Yeah.
and other things. We need, as designers and as the city's project team, to be agile and to be able to evolve those plans to protect the intent of the design while adapting to the conditions that are going to get it built. And I think that that is sometimes an art and a science, and we need to basically begin with the understanding that it's our job to engender goodwill across the board. And that goodwill, painting the picture of what's possible here for whatever the audience is. What's possible here is blocking a flood to 93. Okay, that's pretty great. What's possible here is introducing new resilient fields that will last longer and endure a flood. Okay, that's pretty great. But painting those pictures in a way that everyone in the room, in many rooms, are willing to commit to the outcome before the path to get there is clear. Once we've got that, then we know we will succeed. The line will not be straight, but we know we will get there. And so we really have to be quick on our feet and willing to pivot as needed to push forward.
I was going to talk about funding, and that was so inspirational. That, it is important. So maybe briefly just to sort of talk about all of these things, all of this work, whether it is energy transition or decarbonization, investment in neighborhood housing, or improving the resilience of our communities, does require significant investment. And I think we are very fortunate to be at a point where, as a city, there's more money that is going to this than ever. Right now at Beacon Hill, there is the Mass Ready Act, the environmental bond bill. It is the largest bond bill in the state's history, and it is largely focused on resilience. That there are partners that have come in, like the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, who have an opportunity to provide very significant federal funding to advance this. But to move these projects forward at pace, at the pace that residents expect and want and deserve, we do need to think about how we sort of best collectively sort of prioritize, invest, and design. And so much of what Sherry sort of spoke about is, I think, fundamental. That we won't build the support if we're not building the right park or project or design. I think one additional note, I think it is absolutely right that quick on your feet is essential in all these projects. I think the other two attributes are around patience and perseverance. And that photo that I showed of Langone Park, I look at that photo a lot because it has not only a photo of Langone Park, which is amazing, but in that photo are also sort of a reminder that we can do big things as a community. You can see Boston Harbor and you can see the Zakim Bridge. These are two times that, as a broad region, we have decided there's a major challenge in front of us: the health of our harbor, grinding gridlock in downtown. And we have made a choice to figure out how to actually solve those problems. And both times, we've not only solved or addressed the problem, but we have actually enhanced the community as a result. We've changed the city's relationship with the harbor, the region's relationship with the harbor. We've created the Rose Kennedy Greenway. And it's a reminder to me that, yes, these things are hard, and yes, they certainly take time, and yes, they are complicated, but yes, they can get done. And we have that ability, and so I'm very excited to figure out how with each of these things, and in these cases it may be a more series of projects than singular projects, but how in this series of projects we can make sure that we are doing as we have done in the past, which is deliver something great for our Commonwealth.
Great way to end it. Thank you very much.